The latter half of the 20th century was a period of remarkable transformation for the United States, marked by profound political, social, and economic changes. From the triumphant end of the World War II to the dawn of the 21st century, the U.S. navigated through Cold War tensions, significant civil rights advancements, economic booms and busts, and the rising threat of global terrorism. Each decade brought pivotal events that reshaped the nation's identity and its role on the pivotal stage. So, how did America transform from 1945 to 2001? Well, join us as we take you through the evolution of U.S. history during this dynamic period, highlighting the events that left an indelible mark in the country and the world. And without much ado, let's get started. The end of World War II in 1945 marked a significant turning point for the United States. With the Axis powers defeated, the United States emerged as a global superpower. The war's conclusion saw the U.S. shifted from a wartime to a peacetime economy, resulting in substantial alterations in industry and workforce dynamics. Soldiers returned home to a nation ready to rebuild and redefine its role on the global stage. President Harry S. Truman, who succeeded Franklin D. Roosevelt, faced the challenge of guiding the nation through this transition. One of his pivotal decisions was to adopt a foreign policy aimed at containing the spread of communism, a strategy known as the Truman Doctrine. Announced in 1947, this policy declared that the United States would support free peoples resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures, effectively setting the stage for America's Cold War stance against the Soviet Union. We then had the establishment of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949. It reinforced America's dedication to curbing the spread of communism. NATO was a defensive alliance that included the United States, Canada, and multiple Western European countries. Its primary objective was to provide mutual defense against any aggression from the Soviet Union. This alliance marked a significant shift in U.S. foreign policy from isolationism to a more engaged and interventionist approach in global affairs. And let's not forget about the Korean War, which erupted in 1950. It was a direct consequence of the Cold War tensions. When North Korean forces, backed by Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea, the United States, under the auspices of the United Nations, intervened to support South Korea. The conflict, lasting until 1953, resulted in a stalemate and an armistice agreement, effectively maintaining the division of Korea at the 38th parallel. Now, the 1960s ushered in an era of intense political activity and social change in the United States, beginning with the Kennedy administration. John F. Kennedy, elected in 1960, represented a new generation of American leadership. His presidency is most famously marked by the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, a 13-day confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union over Soviet ballistic missiles deployed in Cuba. This crisis brought the world perilously close to nuclear war. Through a series of tense negotiations, Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev reached an agreement to dismantle the missile installations in exchange for the U.S. promising not to invade Cuba and secretly removing American missiles from Turkey. This episode underscored the fragility of international relations during the Cold War and highlighted the importance of diplomatic resolution in averting global catastrophe. Another significant aspect of the 1960s was a space race, a period of intense competition between the United States and the Soviet Union to achieve superior spaceflight capability. Initiated by the Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957, the race reached its zenith with the Apollo 11 mission. On July 20, 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin made history as the first humans to set foot on the moon. The Vietnam War, however, cast a long shadow over this period. The United States' involvement escalated under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, reaching a peak in the late 1960s. The war, intended to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, became increasingly unpopular as American casualties mounted and media coverage brought the brutal realities of the conflict into American living rooms. Massive anti-war protests erupted across the country, reflecting widespread public discontent. The war ultimately concluded with the withdrawal of U.S. forces in 1973, following the signing of the Paris Peace Accords and the fall of Saigon to communist forces in 1975. The Vietnam War left a lasting impact on American society and politics, fostering a sense of skepticism toward government and foreign interventions. The 1970s were also notable for the Watergate scandal, culminating in President Richard Nixon's resignation in 1974. Investigations uncovered a complex scheme of political espionage and sabotage organized by individuals from Nixon's re-election team. Facing impeachment, Nixon chose to resign, becoming the only U.S. president to do so. Watergate significantly eroded public trust in government and led to reforms aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. The 1980s were a decade of substantial economic and political transformation in the United States, largely shaped by the policies and leadership of President Ronald Reagan. Elected in 1980, Reagan's administration implemented a series of economic policies known as Reaganomics. These policies were based on supply-side economics, which emphasized tax cuts, deregulation, and reductions in government spending. The goal was to stimulate economic growth by encouraging investment and consumption. While Reaganomics succeeded in reducing inflation and spurring economic growth, it also led to increased federal deficits and a growing national debt. The economic benefits were unevenly distributed, contributing to a widening gap between the wealthy and the poor. Economically, the 1980s were characterized by a cycle of recession and recovery. The beginning of the decade experienced a significant economic downturn characterized by high unemployment and interest rates. However, the economy began to recover by mid-decade, fueled by consumer spending, technological advancements, and the aforementioned Reaganomics policies. The stock market experienced significant growth, culminating in the drastic rise and subsequent crash of 1987, known as Black Monday. Despite the crash, the economy rebounded quickly, and the decade ended on a note of robust economic expansion. The 1980s also witnessed significant social changes, most notably the rise of the computer age. Advancements in technology, particularly in personal computing, transformed both the economy and daily life. Companies like Apple, IBM, and Microsoft became household names as computers moved from being specialized business tools to common household items. This technological revolution not only spurred economic growth, but also laid the groundwork for the information age and the digital economy that would dominate the following decades. The 1990s began with a significant military conflict in the Middle East, known as the Gulf War. In August 1990, Iraqi forces under the command of Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, prompting a swift international response. The United States, leading a coalition of 34 nations, launched Operation Desert Storm in January 1991. The military campaign was marked by a massive aerial bombardment, followed by a ground assault that swiftly liberated Kuwait by the end of February. The aftermath of the Gulf War saw the imposition of economic sanctions on Iraq and ongoing military engagement to enforce no-fly zones, significantly impacting the region's stability and U.S. foreign policy. Technological advancements during this period fundamentally transformed American society and the global economy. The widespread adoption of the internet and the rapid growth of information technology industries revolutionized communication, commerce, and everyday life. Companies like Microsoft, Apple, and the newly emerged giants like Amazon and Google became pivotal players in this digital revolution. The development of personal computers, mobile phones, and the expansion of the World Wide Web created new opportunities and industries, significantly boosting economic productivity and changing the way people interacted and conducted business. Social issues during the 1990s saw significant developments. Crime rates, which had been a major concern in the 1980s, began to decline significantly during this decade. Several factors contributed to this decline, including improved law enforcement strategies, demographic changes, and economic prosperity. Welfare reform, as mentioned, aimed to reduce dependency and encourage employment among low-income families. Healthcare also became a significant issue, with Clinton's administration attempting to reform the healthcare system to provide universal coverage. Although the efforts led by First Lady Hillary Clinton ultimately failed, they set the stage for future debates on healthcare reform. During this period, the United States also faced various challenges in the Middle East. The 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center highlighted the growing threat of international terrorism. Additionally, U.S. involvement in Somalia, which began as a humanitarian mission, ended disastrously with the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu. The bombing of US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998, attributed to the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, further underscored the emerging threat of global terrorism. Just as the new decade was beginning, on September 11, 2001, the US faced one of the most severe terrorist attacks in its history. 19 extremists linked to Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial airplanes. After hijacking the planes, 2 of the aircraft crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, causing both towers to collapse. A 3rd plane crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The 4th plane went down in Pennsylvania Field after passengers resisted the hijackers. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost in these orchestrated attacks. In response to the attacks, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom in October 2001, targeting the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which had harbored Al-Qaeda terrorists. The invasion aimed to dismantle terrorist networks and prevent Afghanistan from being used as a base for terrorist activities. The US military, along with allied forces, quickly toppled the Taliban regime, though the conflict would continue for years as insurgents waged guerrilla warfare. Homeland Security was established to coordinate efforts to protect the country from future attacks. The USA Patriot Act, passed in October 2001, expanded law enforcement surveillance and investigative powers to prevent terrorism. These measures, while intended to enhance security, sparked debates over civil liberties and the balance between security and privacy. The long-term consequences of the September 11 attacks have been far-reaching. The war on terror expanded beyond Afghanistan, leading to the Iraq War in 2003. Based on allegations of weapons of mass destruction and connections to terrorism. The global fight against terrorism has influenced US foreign and domestic policies for decades, reshaping military strategies, international relations, and civil liberties. The legacy of 9/11 continues to shape American society, reflecting on the need for vigilance, resilience, and the ongoing struggle to balance security with the values of freedom and democracy. And that's the American history. See you in the next video.